Very happy to be here once again to talk to you about social experimentation and evaluation. Originally, the title of my talk was For Better Policing, but I decided to broaden the title a little bit for sustainable violence reduction, because I want to talk to you about a general approach that we are pushing forward from CAF, where I work, which is a development bank in Latin America. And the goal of the approach that we're bringing to policymakers in the region is to help them make better use of evaluation and experimentation tools in order to improve policymaking. So as a management tool, essentially. So this approach is a little bit different as to what other multilateral organizations are pushing forward. And I think that it's actually a key in terms of not only generating usable, useful evidence, but also having this evidence become a part of decision making, and have significant buy-in and institutional strengthening as part of the process of generating the evidence. So just to put things a little bit into context, of course, crime and violence, Latin America, this is a slide from another presentation that I have. Latin America is the most violent region in the world. So for reducing violence by 50% over the next 30 years, I think we should focus on the world hotspot, which is Latin America. You see that it is 10 times that level of the level of European and North American average. But this is not unrelated. We've been seeing over the course of the past day and a half that this is related also to inequality and segregation in urban places. And these are pictures from Latin American cities that clearly show this sort of amazing, very strong divide that you see in some of these places. Poverty is obviously a major issue, and these are all related to these fundamental long-term causes of violent societies that we think are at the root of some of these problems. Obviously, deficient public services is really important. We've seen there's significant evidence that the quality of public infrastructure is also important for violence and for crime in the streets. And finally, but certainly not the least, and I think this is an underlying topic that I actually will end up coming back to, is the issue of legitimacy. And the legitimacy of the police, certainly, and of the state more generally. This graph here is from a survey that we did last year. It's actually 2013, not 2014 below, where we ask, whether people trust the police. And you can see that nowhere is it over 40%. And in several places it's below 20%, people who say they have some level of trust in police forces. And this is across several important cities in Latin America. So where are we in terms of, so basically the situation is a mess. So what is why aren't policymakers doing more about this? So one thing is that they may not care, right? They may not care about social welfare. They're very self-interested, and so they don't really have any incentive to make the right policy choices. They just want to fill their pockets or whatever, okay? So that's one possibility. Another possibility is that they may not have enough resources. Tax collection in Latin America is about 25% of GDP. Advanced economies, that's about 34% of GDP. So maybe there's a resource issue, potentially. Yes, we can't deny that may be important. But what we think is really very important here, and what we want to focus on in the area where we think that a big difference can be made in the short term, is that policymakers may have very little knowledge about what works and what does not work. So this is where we want to focus on, and this is where we are trying to provide support. It doesn't mean that these other areas are not important and that we can't think about doing something about, corruption and doing things about selection of better leaders or, things of that sort, which have been touched upon in this conference, but we want to focus on the knowledge part. So it turns out that knowledge is really the biggest deficit that we have in Latin America. It's not so much that we don't have resources to do things, it's that we don't know how to use the resources that we have. That's one big lesson that comes up when you come close to policymaking in the region. A lot of resources are basically used and spent without really any basis for doing it one way or the other, aside from what we call the ideological sometimes or intellectual addictions that some people have. So, as life, the policy world is a constant stream of choices. So the policy world is, policymakers at every level are constantly making decisions about resources, and our approach is to say, look, every time a policymaker or an institution makes a decision, this is an opportunity for learning something. So we want to build knowledge from this experience. So, building knowledge from experience is basically learning, and this is why we label it, policy learning. So what is policy learning from our perspective is basically to identify and seize the learning opportunities, promote social experimentation for generating such new knowledge. And so the way we bring this down to earth, so to speak, with a policymaker is to say, look, you can use evaluation experimentation as a management tool. We're not going to bring a research agenda to you and ask you to help us implement a certain RCT or something because we like to ask the question. We want to know what you want to know and basically help you answer whatever question you have about whatever program you want to implement. Of course, we want to help bring the highest academic standards to the answering of these questions. And one thing that we have to keep in mind is that, if we do not meet the highest academic standards, or at least we're not very completely clear about what those standards are within the context of the particular research project, then our answer to the policy question is not going to be completely sincere in some way. So as a matter of honesty, as we have an ethical obligation to submit to the highest standards, and ultimately, because the ultimate goal is to generate useful knowledge, we need to have the authorities involved in the entire process. So they need to be involved in the process of asking the questions, and then in the process of thinking about how we're going to answer those questions. And so what we do is we bring in, whatever academic expertise we have or we can bring from other people and sit them down at the same table and then, churn out together a research project. So just to give you a few examples of this sort of work that we've been doing in the region, the first example, and I'll only talk about policing examples, but we have others. This began by a request from the National Police to help them in Colombia, to help them evaluate. This was around, early 2000. It's actually late 2010. They wanted us to help them evaluate the impact of a training program, which actually they wanted us to evaluate the impact of a large-scale community policing program that they had. So we came in and there's people running a diagnostic as to how the program was actually being implemented because it was already underway. We couldn't, randomly allocate the program itself. And so we sat there and tried to understand what they wanted to, what they were doing, what they needed from us. And then the diagnostic came back that the police officers in the street, they didn't really know how to engage people. They didn't really know how to talk to anyone in the street. And so a proposal came up to say, look, let's give police a training on how to talk to community leaders, how to, conflict resolution and things of that sort, which we generally call a soft skill training program. So that we said, we can evaluate that in the context of this general program. And so we designed an experiment by randomly allocating 120 police stations in 8 major cities to one of 3 training cohorts. We generated temporary experimental variation across stations within each city. So we could see, how things were changing across stations, up until the last station was trained. So there are some lessons that came out of this. Training improved police, and this is, I think, the most important one, is that the training apparently improved officers' relationship with the community. Our interpretation is that this is through an empathy channel, because what they say is that they feel more accountable towards the population. And what we know is that they have had more interaction with the population, so it is through human interaction that you're more able to put yourself in another one's shoes. And so this empathetic relationship, we believe, is what has led police officers to say, look, let's do a little bit of a better job. And so there has been an improvement in the delivery of policing services and with subsequent impact on some criminal outcomes. Okay, so what is the consequence of, ultimately, this is very interesting in an academic sense, that's true, but ultimately we also wanted the police to do something about that, to take that and make a decision based on this. And to some extent, we don't really control that process, obviously, but we do know that the soft skills training, has been incorporated into the general training of the program for the program's expansion nationwide. So that's one fairly positive example. We have another example from Argentina. And I have sitting here the person responsible for this project having been possible, Lucia Morales, where basically I was there in Argentina with a group of people from CAF trying to talking about possibly evaluating a completely different program. And so Lucia was there, and we were at the meetings, and she came up to me and, in one break or something, and she said, look, I have this training program that we're doing for the rational use of force by the federal police, and I'd like to evaluate that. And so the other program ended up being a mess, so we couldn't do it. And so we ended up working with Lucia to evaluate this program. And the goals of the program were twofold. One, to increase the police officers' safety, and to reduce off-duty violence incidents. These are basically the two main goals. So what we did is to help them design an evaluation, because the selection in the order in which police officers were trained was basically alphabetical. Within the list of the prioritized 3,000 police officers to be trained, they were just going into the training by alphabetical order. So that's just as good as random, and we actually show that in our that basically the people with last names between A and M are really statistically no different than those that have last names that start with letters further down the alphabet. So this is essentially what we did. We designed a list experiment, a survey based on list experiments in order to elicit truthful responses. List experiments essentially involve doing an experiment within your survey population. You assign half to receive, let's say, one question. You have one question that is, do you believe in taking justice into your own hands? Okay, this is the sensible thing, and no one, if you ask them directly, is going to say yes, I believe this. So they would all say no, of course not. And they know how to respond to these kinds of questions. So what we did is just gave them a list to a group. Half of them we gave them a list of 3 options, And then to the other half, we gave them a list of the same 3 options plus this other one. And we asked both groups to tell us with how many they were in agreement with, not which ones. And so the difference, it turns out that the difference between the 2 groups is the population average that is in agreement with the 4th one. Okay, so we did this with a several number of things. We're actually implementing this strategy in other places as well. And what we found that, because the time span was actually fairly short, and the number of violence incidents off duty are relatively few. So in order to find an impact on the outcome that we're interested in, which is actually violence, it's been a little difficult. Statistically, we have no power, basically, to detect an effect on actual incidents of violence. But we do have an effect. There is a negative effect, but it's not statistically significant. So we do believe that we're actually affecting the ultimate outcome of interest. But we can't say that it's, with confidence that it's different from 0. But when we look at the survey, we do. So of course we surveyed people who were, who had already been trained and people who were going to be trained later on as the control group. And so the program did increase safety awareness. It reduced the officers' inclination to use inadequate use of force. It increased their perceived importance of dialogue when relating to a suspect. And so I put here, this is, key input in current budgetary discussions. And the past few days I've been, exchanging with Lucia. She's brought me back down to the reality of the Argentinian political process, which is that they basically threw this thing out the window and didn't, essentially have completely ignored it, despite the fact that when I went there to present these results, I was expecting a table of, 5 or 6 people, closed small rooms such as this one. It turns out that I went into an auditorium with like 250 people, packed with police officers and people from the security ministry. And it turned out to be a very lively public discussion about the importance of police training at that very juncture when they were making decisions about, how to distribute a certain budget. And so, ultimately, I guess the people who didn't want more training won. But we at least brought some significant piece of information to this discussion. So we're really happy with this experience, anyways. Last thing I'd like to mention is an ongoing experiment on hotspots policing that we are implementing in Caracas. As you know, Caracas is one of the most violent cities in Latin America and therefore the world. And this is in an area of Caracas that is particularly violent. It's not the entire city. And this is just a piece of these are all, each dot here is a homicide. So with this, what we did is, so there's high concentration of homicide, like you would expect. 80% of homicides are concentrated in 6% of the street segments. 100% are concentrated in 9% of the street segments in this municipality. In this municipality alone, there are about 400 homicides a year. And what we did is we identified 92 hotspots according to the, species separation analysis. So sort of, we have always hot places that are getting hot, or places that are getting cooler, or new hotspots. We have a classification, but essentially what we did is we, after identifying the 92 hotspots, we actually identified more than 100, but we went to the places with the police officers and said, look, do you think this says here that this is a hotspot. Do you agree? Do you think this is a relevant intervention area? And they said so. So we discarded some, and we were left with 92. And then we paired them up according to initial levels of homicide, population density, and closeness to each other. And so we paired them up and randomly selected one in each pair for increased dosage. The protocol was to do 4 10 to 15 minute visits at each hotspot every day. And we put in place a very sophisticated, very similar to what Larry has done in Trinidad with drawing a geofence around each hotspot and then counting in a GPS on each patrol car. And when patrolling wasn't done on cars but on motorcycles, then the police officer had to take a handheld GPS and put it in his pocket, and then get on the motorcycle and go do the hotspot visit. And the major challenge that we've faced, even though we have, this very sophisticated, easy to implement actually, fairly easy to implement, there is some problems with sometimes the GPS will mark something that is, like 10 miles away from where the actual police car is. So you have to do a little bit of cleaning of some of this noise around the data. So it's not as easy. Patrolling the ocean, or homicides like at the top of a mountain, which is it has happened, but it's not very likely. So yeah, we have that kinds of those kinds of problems are there. But even after you sort of give yourself a little bit of a buffer room for saying, well, there's some room for error in this measurement of compliance, our compliance numbers are very, very low. So at the peak of our experiment, we were providing about 85% of the dosage at each hotspot, which was really good, but that only lasted like 3 days. The average over the entire period, this began about in November of last year up to now, it's just been going down, and right now if I had to average out the whole period, we would have about 20% or 25% compliance. So this means instead of 60 minutes a day per hotspot, we're at best providing 15, and I actually think it's probably even lower. And this is even, so we tried several things. So you'd say, you just need to monitor these guys closer. And so, okay, let's generate a system that will send a report 3 times a day to the supervisors, and that will say, look, the hotspots, of your team are, haven't been covered at all today. So you need to put some pressure on your group. So we had daily reports 3 times a day with these kinds of things. We provided, they don't have enough incentives. So we created these incentives, and we gave, at the end of the first 3-month trial, we gave iPads to the 3 top performers, which is kind of an expensive incentive, ultimately. We could have done much better at providing. I agree. We should have done something different. But in any case, this is one thing that we tried, and it clearly has not worked. So we're now shifting. The focus of this research program has changed completely in my mind. And it's actually changed in the priority that the local government is giving to this is shifted entirely. Because we said, okay, it's not incentives, it's not monitoring, so what is it? Let's do a survey. Let's survey all of these police officers and see what motivates them to put a little bit more effort or less effort. Do they identify with the leadership of their team or of the organization of, I don't know, even the mayor or whatever? So, and what do they need in terms of equipment, or what? So we are dumbstruck by our finding with this, trying to run this survey. There are 900 police officers in this on the payroll. Okay, on the payroll of this police, this local police, and we have been. There are about 200 of them that are on medical leave or on vacation, so they're justifiably a little bit difficult to find. But there are 300 of them that we cannot find. And we have had, and this is a professional survey firm that it's not like, undergraduate research assistants that are standing around somewhere trying to do a survey. It's a professional firm that we hired, with professional surveyors sitting at the police stations where they're supposed to come in, when their shift is on, and then change or whatever. And so we have not been able to find. It's comical, but it's not funny.
So I said make them come in to get their paycheck. You said that's what.
So you can see. So you see, this is the thing. We're here. The research project has been evolving according to whatever the needs of the situation are. So now we have actually shifted into something different. I mean, the experimental protocol is still in place. Okay, we actually reduced the number of treatment hotspots from 46 to 34 because they said, this is another thing that we did. No, we don't have the capacity to cover the 46. That's too much. We don't have time or whatever. So, okay, let's just do 34, and then compliance didn't go up. So now, actually, what we're thinking of is say, how can we? What do we do now? So because this can be a major issue for the police. This mayor is constantly arguing that he has the best paid police in the country. Has reduced homicide over the past 6 years by 43%, which are true things. But he may open a can of worms here, and I think he should. I mean, he may not. I don't know what he's going to do. When I get back next week, we'll try to persuade him to actually do it. But the thing is that regardless of what he does publicly, privately, they're probably going to do something about checking attendance, keeping attendance for police. Maybe using, a fingerprint reader for every day and something like that. Increasing our control mechanisms over the police, which I'm not so sure is going to do it. If I were, this is just now, thinking out loud. If I were the mayor, I would fire the police chief, number one. I would fire every one of these police officers and take their paycheck and give it to the ones that do attend, so double their salary or something like that. And then just try to make that, a redefining moment of the organization or something like that. I don't know what will happen, but this is our reality. And not surprisingly, because our dosage is so low, the difference between treatment and control is really not statistically significantly different. We've had every month, for the duration of the experiment, about between 6, 7, 8, 9, sometimes homicides at the treatment and the control hotspots. So I'm not very surprised about the ineffectiveness of the program, basically because of this institutional problem. So other projects that we're doing things on tax compliance, and which are things that are related to longer-term determinants of crime and violence. We're doing, these are all randomized evaluations of an urban upgrading program in Lima, a randomized evaluation of an employment program for disadvantaged youth in Argentina, sports for development experiment in Peru as well. This is something that is actually quite an extensive kind of activity. The world over has sports for development, because apparently sports improve cognitive and social emotional development of children, but there's really not a single experiment that we have seen anywhere on this.
Mauritius, age 46, exercise and nutrition.
In Mauritius?
Yeah, by age 25 it reduced violence by a third.
Okay, good. Then this is going to be the second experimental evaluation of something like this. So I'll look for that. Did you work on that? Adrian. Okay, I'll look for it. So, anyways, so just to finalize going back to the more general question of how do we promote from an international development organization. How do we promote violence reduction? I think that this kind of approach that we're taking is to actually help policymakers, help institutions learn and make use of knowledge and is actually the best thing that I think that we can do from a development perspective. And obviously, all of these long-term determinants of crime and violence are part of the development sort of question, development issues. And of course, we are also doing a lot of work on policing. We just recently, actually yesterday, I received an email from the Colombian prosecutor's office asking us to help them evaluate the use of a more streamlined investigative procedure for homicide. So they want to actually randomly evaluate this. Not randomly evaluate, use random assignment to evaluate, okay? This is a different thing.
How many cases do they have?
Well, it's a big country. They have it's thousands. Yeah, so they are willing to randomly allocate individual cases to the regular procedure plus a streamlined. So this is the kind of thing that by doing all these other things and having this approach, we are opening ourselves, doors to doing more and more of this kind of thing. And obviously, there are some important related, similar kinds of institutions, experiences, especially here in the UK, the well-known nudge unit. The Cabinet Office Works Council recently came out with a report on Jonathan Shepherd wrote on the state of what works. What's it called? Ecosystem, something in the UK. So there certainly the US has this thing with this horrible OIRA name that is basically trying to do kind of the same thing. Help whenever a government agency wants to innovate in some dimension, then they'll help experiment with it a little bit and try to rigorously measure its effects, and so that it can gradually move. And it's not only about behavioral stuff, and that's why I don't want to just say that this is only nudging, because it's not only nudging. We're talking about incentives too. We're talking about a major institutional change in some cases. So it's not just behavioral sort of economics kind of thing. Certainly this is not the view of impact evaluation and development work. If you go to the World Bank, the IDB, even private donors, they do not have this view. This is a very different approach, and I think that we are making significant headway because our number of projects has boomed over the past year and a half that we've existed. So, as a conclusion, I think that this is we can actually it is possible to make the footprint, the knowledge footprint that policymaking is leaving in the region, to make it more long-lasting, and so that it will have a deeper impact on future and the quality of future policymaking in the region. So, thank you.